Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the partial double quarters. A very warm welcome to all the teams for making it this far. Let's have a virtual round of applause to everyone. Congratulations. My name is Sarah, and I'll be your chair for today. My preferred gender pronouns are she or they, although I prefer you refer to the panel as a whole. I'll let my panel introduce themselves. So starting with the order on the draw. So I believe it's Harmen first.
Hi, I'm Harmen. I have no preferred gender pronouns.
Hi, Melda. I prefer she or they, please.
Cool. And can we get all the teams in the room to introduce yourselves? So starting with opening government, your speaking order, names, and preferred gender pronouns if you wish.
Hi, David speaking first. He or they is fine.
OG second speaker.
Sorry, Daniel speaking second, he please.
OO.
Gil speaking first, here they. Asaf speaking second, no preference.
EG. Joshua, you're muted.
Joshua speaking first, he please, and Han Yang speaking second, he or they.
CO.
Raphael speaking first, he or they, please.
Lucy second, please.
Excellent. Unless there are any questions about the standing orders, the motion before the House today reads, this House would ban insurance coverage for sexual misconduct claims. I call the House to order. I wish speakers all the best, and I invite the Prime Minister. Here.
Am I audible? So just a few seconds. I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it's very funny to me that in status quo, I am barely able to submit an insurance a submission for my car, and they expect women to do so for sexual misconduct. A huge problem in our society of sexism, of women discrimination, and of depressing them is happening not on the criminal level only, but also on a sub-level of touching your shoulder, of giving you a sexist remark, of not promoting you because you're too pretty to be the boss. These things are not being executed properly by courts and companies are not getting a big enough penalty. In our world, we need to change that. And our mechanism is simple. You cannot anyhow just give coverage for that. All companies will get a direct suit, and they will need to go and settle that in court or by any other kind of party that is not an insurance company. This is going to give you two critical points in OG. One, how this is going to reduce sexual assault and just sexual misconduct. And two, why on the comparative, this is much better than the insurance companies. A point of clarification before we start? Yes.
Would it be fine for these companies to go to court as long as the fine that happens after the court process is paid out by an insurance company?
No. The insurance company is not relevant in any case. They cannot be involved. This is the mechanism. Let's start with how it's going to reduce sexual misconduct. Notice that a crucial thing nowadays is the cost for companies. Obviously, a big penalty for them is an incentive to behave more, to give their employees better orders, to give more lessons about sexual misconduct, to just prosecute employees and to be more harsher to them. It doesn't happen in status quo because of a few mechanisms that we're going to give you. A, because the premium for insurance is very low, rather than a direct suit on court. Why is that? Because usually what happens is that this is a part of a larger package of, if an employee falls and breaks his leg, or if an employee does a sexual misconduct, these are all part of one huge premium, and eventually the cost of that is quite lower. I mean, it's not something that is significant to the company. And two, we say that eventually they're able to go that even if there's some kind of issue and they need to participate in some kind of a marginal, cost, this is not a thing that is affecting big companies that have hundreds of employees, and this is not something that they're so afraid of. And And eventually, even if they raise the premium, you need to understand that raising a premium for a company is not that big. Usually when you have a car crash or whatever, they raise the premium by a few percent. And when it's part of a huge insurance package, this is not enough to change a company's behavior. But more than that, many companies, if they are getting huge raises, have a big bureaucratic links of companies. They're able to get better insurance, and by just making bureaucratic gains. By that, we don't think that this is enough of an impact to do so. How on the comparative are insurance companies worse, and why this is better on our side? We need to understand that insurance companies eventually are not giving a specific premium per company. They're not going and say, okay, the company A, let's assess the sexual misconduct probability and send auditors. They're not doing that because it's impossible, because they're insuring hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of companies. What they're doing is one huge premium that is based on the average in society, but is not taking into account specific horrible companies. That means that the actual companies that are very bad are getting away with that because they're getting a very low premium on the comparative, because these insurance companies are so big and they don't have a proper incentive to actually create something that that eventually quantifies a big enough risk for them to lose. But more than that, we need to understand that they are the masters of bureaucracy, the master of legal and court handling. When you have a suit against an insurance company, they have, I mean, their literal business model is how to take your suit and minimize that and reduce that to the most minimal amount in order for you not to get what you want. That means that they're playing around with legal terms. That means that they know exactly the ins and outs of everything. Notice that on the comparative, no matter how big of a company you have in electronics or internet, etc., these are the companies that made a business model out of it. So when a woman goes and tries to battle with the insurance company, with our lawyer or whatever, they're seeing a much lesser ability to actually beat them on the legal level. But more than that, we need to understand about the amounts, because even if the women is able to win, they're able to minimize that by huge extent, by basically, I mean, basically doing everything possible to show that they gave the report too late, because I don't know, because they reported that on the wrong person, because they filed it wrong, because I don't know, because the evidence was not exactly how the contract aligns. We said this is horrible. Now on the comparative, why it's better? Because and also regarding PR, these companies are always in PR battles. They're always seen as the bad guys. They don't care about bad PR and backlash like private companies. Why are private companies much better on the alternative? A, they're less legal savvy. They don't have the proper knowledge on how to minimize and reduce any court sentence and escape suits. We see that on the comparative, what's likely is that you'll have like that you'll be eventually be sued in court for sexual misconduct, and that you'll handle it via the company, which is less strong legal wise. They are more vulnerable to PR because eventually they're not an insurance company. And C, we see that eventually they're more vulnerable, I mean, to high cost than the insurance company, which I think eventually is far less of a good actor in that sense. Before I continue, I'll take a POI. Yes.
Yeah. What actually happens within the company in your role? What actions are they taking to minimize risk?
I think I saw that in the framing. We said on the comparative on our level, what is the impact and why it's going to help. More suits are going to happen. More women will actually be able to get like their misconduct claim approved. That means that not only more will get approved, but more money will be issued, because again, these companies are less efficient than insurance companies in minimizing these women's claims. This is crucial, and that means that they'll have more incentive to actually break down people's their employees and all the companies' guidelines in order to reduce misconduct. But secondly, just like in the account of deterrence for women, you need to understand many women are afraid of handling with insurance companies because they know all the stories. They know how difficult it is to handle with them. On the contrary, against a company that is specific, a private company, it's much easier to get public opinion against you. It's much easier to push against them. They're much more vulnerable to PR. They're less effective in courts. They don't have the actual legal savviness that an insurance company has. That they know that they have far more tools and incentives to actually win against them in the case. That means that more will file, and when more will file, more scandalous activities of misconduct will be issued. That means that eventually in our world, because we switch and take this type of misconduct suits into the companies and not into the insurance companies, more companies will get far greater fines, and therefore for these reasons you need to propose the motion. Thank you.
We thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech. Let's now call upon the Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi. Okay. Wait, hold on, that's water. 3, 2, 1. We feel that we need to clarify this debate because the framing that we get from PM is confusing. What happens in the world is when somebody complains against the company that there was sexual harassment or sexual assault, something like that, they settle out of court and maybe go to a courthouse, and when that person wins, they get awarded compensation. Then the corporation goes to the insurance company and gets that money out of them because it's the corporation that took out the policy that is insuring them. That's what's actually in the world. There is no connection between the woman and the insurance company. They don't need to handle that. The company is the one that is liable for all that. We think that in itself completely take up like the latter half of the PM speech. And about the prior part of their speech, we needed to give this POI because the PM doesn't actually give us what actually changes in the world. We're going to talk about that in my speech, and considering that the companies we think are already doing as much as they can to handle these sort of things, we don't think they're actually liable. It's not actually their fault, and they don't need to pay for that. I'll take you later, Oj. 2 points in my speech. Firstly, a massive cooling off and pressure against complaints as compared to the status quo, because you increase the incentive to that by companies in the comparative. And secondly, why it's simply illegitimate, because we believe it's not the company's fault and they're already doing the best that they can. Let's talk about cooling off. So we concede there is already some pressure against complaint against the company in status quo because it's bad for company PR. Nobody wants to handle that. It's annoying. We think that the incentive to do that increases massively in the comparative, because right now the damage to the company when somebody complains about sexual misconduct mostly is PR, right? Which is something you can fix by a PR campaign, by going to the press and saying, oh, look, we're taking all these measures, we're really regretful. And also it kind of goes away after a month or two, right? Even in our Me Too age, it's something that is bad for the company, so they're taking measures against that to preempt that, but it's not something that is devastating to them, right? What happens under OG's comparative? The bottom line of the company is harm, probably significantly, especially if it's a smaller firm. It's something that might take them out, right? You get a significant financial harm to shareholders, which the managers of the companies are beholden onto. You harm the bonuses of these very managers, who are the one who are interacting with all the parties of that lawsuit and therefore are likely to exert pressure. And you reduce the interest of financial investors to invest in a company because now the bottom line is harm. It's simply less profitable, right? That means that in compared to status quo, the pressure to prevent the complaint, to even start this procedure, to preempt that at the start, is way greater. How does this look like? Pressure and retribution, right? When you talk to your manager, when you say that person harmed me in that way, that person like flashed his penis or whatever, tried to pin me down and assault me, you get way more, no, he's a good guy, don't talk to him, that's not what we do here, we'll handle this among us, don't regard this. And then the subtext that is increasing, if you complain, we will fire you. We will harm your career. This is bad for you. This is not something you want. You should not be doing that. Note that retribution needn't actually be like outright firing because of that, because that's probably illegal, but it could be holding back your career, not inviting you to social events when you're mingling and networking, which is crucial for a lot of career, like law firms and things like that. We think there's a huge spectrum of measures that these managers can enact and have a huge incentive, specifically financial, for their own bottom line at the end of the quarter to enact, that we think now happens way more in status quo. Note that this also prevents other people from complaining, maybe even about that same flasher, that same person, but definitely about other people. Why? Because you need personal example of bravery of other people that come out and say, I was harmed in this way, in this environment, to inspire you to do the same, to give you the bravery. And also, once you see this retribution, once you see this pressure, how the people who would complain are harmed, you're way more afraid, you're unlikely to do that. The bottom line here is, at the outset, the people who we need to protect to give them the money to help them get that less because they don't start complaining, and other people don't complain as well, which means that the predators keep their place in the company, which we think is a massive harm, right? Because they continue to predate on other people. Before I move on to why it's not actually the company's fault, I'm going to take actually CG.
On your side of the house, insurance premiums are a fixed cost that is paid every single month and is presumably internalized by shareholders. Why would there be such a massive shock that would cause the shareholders to want to change incentives?
Oh, right, I'm getting to that. Again, because bad PR is bad PR, and they want to avoid that. Note that already exists in status quo. I'll get to that. Second point of legitimization, well, it's simply not their fault. 2 points on that. Firstly, they're already doing their best. Secondly, it's actually that individual's fault. First point, we think that in the current social climate of Me Too and people being way more aware of that, the vast majority of companies are already doing their best. Now, what are those things? That's the thing that we ask from PM, doing like, what's the word? Sessions where you explain this is bad behavior, you should not be doing that, being very firm, posting on notices of this kind of behavior will not be tolerated, you should be ashamed of yourself, taking complaints very seriously, handling them to the most of care. We think that already happens in status quo. Why? Because of that social pressure. Because yes, a harm to PR is bad for the company for a month or two, and a manager that allowed that to happen and allowed it to be protracted for a long time is likely to be penalized. Like they don't want to do that. And also they want to recruit female talent, right? Because if you're a firm that is known to be inhospitable and unlikely, you're already to do that. Once you realize that they're already doing that thing, what more could you want, right? What do you want from them to do? What could they actually change in the world? It's unclear what governments want. But no, that's actually not their fault. Even if you're saying there's a bad climate in the company, we think that's still not their fault. Because in a lot of these cases of sexual predators, it happens in a closed room. Like it's word against word. There's no way to actually prevent that in the first place. There's no evidence, so it's really hard to like enforce any sort of company policy. And we think that sexual predators do that for the feeling of power over the people who they are predating, right? To feel stronger against their victims. We don't think that's actually something that companies can regulate, that can prevent, that can happen. The decisions to go and sexually assault somebody is essentially like the person who's doing that decision, like not the company. They didn't cause that, and they had limited liability to prevent that, and they already did all they could. That means that in the bottom line, it's simply not their fault, and it's illegitimate to take them away from that. And for all these reasons, very proud to oppose.
We thank the Leader of Opposition for that fine speech. Let's now call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. They're here.
Am I audible? Yes. 1, 2, 3. Panel, for far too long, companies and individuals just roll the risk of being accused and have to pay fines and compensations to employees, simply rolling the risk onto the insurance company. And we think this needed to stop. We're going to show you, one, why we think that it creates a better incentive to improve processes when the risk is on the company and not the insurance company. And second of all, why after the claim is actually being made, we want the company to manage the process and not the insurance company. A few points of rebuttal. One, a mechanistic but important point, this idea of OO, the trial is against the company and only then the insurance is compensated. I'm sorry, but this is not how insurance works. I own a company. I have run a bunch of insurance lawsuits against that, not sexual misconduct, don't worry. So I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about when I'm saying that once something has filed a suit against you, the insurance company come to you, say, move aside, please, and manage the process from start to end until it comes to you with the result and ask for your part in deductibles. This is like this because the insurance company want to make sure they manage the process, they control the outcomes, and they actually know what is happening in court to minimize the amount of money it needs to pay. So this is how insurance works, and you are not characterizing it correctly. Second of all, about this idea that is going to scare a complainer from complaining. We think that, one, this is symmetric in both sides of the house because there is always going to be a strong incentive for companies to try and hold back complaints. This is not going to change dramatically once insurance doesn't exist. Second of all, we think that most of the times, this kind of complaints and suits happening after the employee has left the companies, because anyway, people don't want to confront their direct boss during the time they are suing them. So we think that this is not a significant impact when they say to you, they're going to threat you with firing, because anyway, you're probably no longer work there, and therefore they don't have a significant whip to hold over your head. Third point of rebuttal, they say, but companies are already doing their best. So two answers. One, yes, it's possible that some very liberal companies are doing their best, and this is a very good thing, but you think that it's very, very naive to just assume that the majority of companies does it. You think that there are many, many things that can be done. Most of the companies don't do it because they simply don't care enough, because the entire analysis, which you don't answer to, and B, look, we simply don't accept the sexual misconduct is something that just happened from the sky magically, and there is nothing that we can do to prevent. Obviously, there are better ways to train and supervise our employees, and yes, we need to do that. This is not just an accident, this is an active thing people are doing, and we need to stop them. Okay, let's go to my substance. One, why we think that insurance companies doesn't have a strong enough interest to improve the situations. One, David tells you, most of the time, insurance coverage is a large package with many, many different aspects of it. Most of the insurance goes to like product liability, third-party insurance, employee hazards, your assets, like your buildings, your machines, your stock. This is like 99% of what insurance cost and premium is all about. What it means is that insurance companies pay very, very little attention to this small part of the premium that doesn't really add too much. And therefore, if some position is going to show us that the insurance company is actually a better actor to go inside and improve the processes to avoid future lawsuits, we show to you why this is something that is not likely to happen, because the effect of this particular premium is very low with the whole package. Second of all, we think that most of the times lawsuits, like the amount of compensation is relatively small in comparison to like product damages, assets, stuff like this, and therefore there is no strong incentive to reduce the risk specifically there. And third of all, even if there is an incentive, they don't have the ability to actually supervise the processes, because if they want to actually, I don't know, claim that insurance company would actively supervise over the internal HR process of the company, then sorry, it's not going to happen. They don't have the capacity and the think that this, sorry, can you hear me? Okay. So we think that basically what it means is that we don't have the ability to, the insurance company won't have the ability to actually improve processes, even if they really want to. So what this means, and compared to what David already is saying to you, that companies themselves does have the incentive, because if they have to pay this fine and to pay this amount out of their own pocket, this is a major impact on their balance sheet, on their P&L in the end of the year. This is something that they will want to avoid. This is something that they will do their best of their ability to improve HR processes, to make sure that they have a line in order to accept complaints before they escalate to a worse situation. All of the things that, as OO already showed you, some companies do because they want to attract better employees and to have a liberal perception, now would be applied to all of the companies. This is a major impact. Before I continue, I'll take CO.
If the insurance is risking having to pay major damages, doesn't that also mean that premiums will be high? Like you cannot, like if we're marginal, we're both marginal.
Yes, yeah, okay. Except my entire analysis, why we think that specific premium on this specific part is a significantly smaller than the entire insurance package. If you're already giving a premium on the entire package of the insurance of the company, this specific point has a very little impact on the entire offering, and therefore the added cost of the calling me.
Hi, no, we still can't hear you. Yeah, I've paused the time at 6:15 seconds.
Now you can hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So I have another. I have another minute.
You have another 45 seconds to a minute. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start again. 1, 2, 3. So then David also gives you the second analysis. Why do you think that after the claim is being filed, it's much worse to manage the process to the insurance company and not the company? Because insurance company doesn't have the reputational risk of going into court and managing a long and tedious process, right? They have dozens of retainer lawyers. They want to maximize the profit from the specific lawsuit. It means that we're likely to see much more ugly trials in which it's word against word, no ability to actually prove this misconduct, and therefore this suitors in a inherent a problem against the companies. But the companies themselves does have this incentive because they don't have the PR risk, and therefore it's much more likely that they would like to settle on a better sum. This has had 3 impacts. 1, more money coming to the people who are actually being offended to. 2, less tedious and horrible trials. And 3, more justified claim to begin with because less deterrence. Please propose.
We thank the DPM for their fine speech. Let's now call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
3, 2, 1, start. I'm going to have 2 points in my speech. First of all, what is the actual comparative in this debate and why insurance companies are going to regulate all of this? This is going to solve all of the problems coming from opening government. Secondly, where do we get better and bigger compensation for the victims themselves? And this would be enough for us to win the debate. Before that, 1 point of clarification of this debate and 1 point of rebuilding. So, clarification. Look, when I insure my car, if I make an accident, then I'm the one that needs to go and sue the insurance company. This means that I'm the one to have all the proceedings against them because the situation is that, first of all, I am responsible for this. Second of all, it's my insurance. It doesn't make any sense that other people will approach my insurance for this money back, right? Because this just means that you need to show that you weren't responsible for the damage that you did. So you need to have actual justification for all of this. And this just means that the women don't approach the insurance companies directly, but the corporations do. And this is enough for us to take down a lot of the weird mechanistic problems of what happens when you approach the insurance companies. Secondly, rebuilding, note that they don't answer entirely the fact that when companies aren't liable, and we do believe that a lot of companies aren't liable under the status quo, even if they say this is a small amount, these companies are now going to pay a much heavier fine than they should have been paying, and this is just illegitimate to begin with. Note, this is enough for us to win the debate, because this means that innocent companies are now going to get heavily punished, and we just believe this is a massive damage. What is the actual comparative in this debate, right? The corporation sues the insurance companies. What happens? The entire point about okay, what happens? When you need to prove that this is a justifiable claim, you need to show that you have done anything in the insurance contract to prevent this from happening, right? Because otherwise the insurance company is going to go to the specific corporations and tell them, look, have you done A, B, C, D? If you haven't, these are clauses in your agreement that say that you're not entitled to get this compensation to begin with. Now, we just believe that it's much more likely that these insurance companies will be better in defining these criteria than the corporations themselves. Why? First of all, because they see a lot of cases and they want to pay as little money as possible, it is just beneficial for them to implement the best things possible to prevent them from, to prevent these suits from happening in the first place. Meaning changing the conduct of the company, changing the environment, doing education and stuff like that. All of this just makes sure that the company does its best. Note, corporations or even smaller companies, smaller businesses of 100 people don't have all this information of what prevents sexual misconduct because they don't operate all of these claims. This means that they're just less likely to do this. This just means that we win on opening government's metric of what happens when you make it the responsibility of the corporations themselves to do all the regulations. Then opening opposition have two responses for this. First of all, they tell us, look, it's a really small premium in a really weird package of insurances. This is insane. First of all, note that they're banning this specific package of insurance. This just means that this is really beneficial for the companies, the total assertion. Secondly, note, we're talking about a whole ton of money for these companies. We just don't believe that this is going to be a small premium because insurance companies need to have a heavy premium to actually be able to pay the money back to companies when something does happen. So we just believe that this is a heavy part of the insurance. But secondly, opening opposition to us, look, they don't have the possibility because it's really hard for them to gather the HR and stuff like that. First of all, note that their own mechanism proves that once you put the liability on the companies, this changes the incentive structure. We actually show you a better mechanism than going through an entire court process, which is just longer. Secondly, insurance companies are enormous because they need to pay this huge amount of money to begin with. This means that they have a lot of resources because otherwise they wouldn't have the redundant payments that they could have paid to these companies. Right? When we're talking about AIG, when we're talking about these huge corporations, this just means that they have a lot of money, a lot of manpower compared to a small business of 100 or 200 people, which don't have all the manpower to actually regulate this and actually implement all these things. Lastly, they are really specializing in this, right? They're going to define these really strict contracts and they see all these cases day by day, and all they're trying to do by opening governance analysis is to minimize the amount they pay. This just means that they're going to define this in the best way possible to pay as little. Before I go on, opening.
No insurance company would ever be able to actively supervise your internal processes, even if they have the incentive, which will show you why they don't. The company that directly employs those do have.
No, this is false because they're going to go to the company, they're going to sit in meetings. Note that from the total amount of companies paying this, a really small amount of companies is going to sue for this claim. This means that they're going to have all their massive resources now gathered to the small amount of companies that, and then they are really able to get into the internals of the company and regulate this. Let's talk about where do we get better compensation, because note, opening government don't answer the fact that a lot of these things are going to be silenced before they begin. This means that under their world, a lot of claims just don't see light and people don't get compensation, right? This is enough for us to win already because this means a lot of claims just end without money. But moreover, under our side, it's just easier to get, first of all, more money. Why? Because it comes from the insurance company and not from the corporation, so they don't have any incentive to take you to a long trial to make you help. Moreover, note, sanctions from the corporation are much heavier and much more scary to the defendants than sanctions from the insurance company. So this just means that once the corporation is liable, they have every incentive to silence this and they have much more ability. Secondly, we just believe that you are going to get this faster. Why? Because you don't need a courtroom. You don't need evidence, right? The corporation and the defendant have the incentive to make it as fast as possible because the corporation wants it to go away. But note, the insurance company is just faster than the court system. Why? Because if it pays through a really long process and a long time, then people are not going to go to this insurance company to begin with, so they would just prefer other companies. We just say it's going to be strict, it's going to be fast, it's going to be enough.
We sang the dialogue for that fine speech. Let's now call upon the member of government. Here.
Hi, am I audible? Yep, that's good. Sorry, my mic didn't work for some reason earlier in the introduction, so I just wanted to make sure. Because I wasn't muted, but for some reason the voice didn't come out, which is really weird. But if I cut off at any time, just let me know because of that. I was a bit worried. So just a few seconds with my papers and then I'll begin. Thank you. Great. Am I still audible? Just making sure. Yep, cool. Starting in 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The reason why a lawsuit is so horrible and so not good for companies is not necessarily that companies have to pay a little or a lot, but the uncertainty that ingrains within the looming lawsuit and the discourse that it shapes and the psychological effect that it has on people is the unique mechanism as to why we want these companies to be under these lawsuits and how that causes change. I'm going to be very realistic in this debate because I think a lot of the opening half misses on how insurance claims are actually like, how they actually manifest, and how this leads to changes in companies. 3 extensions, therefore. A, how we mechanize the changes within companies in terms of things like company policy. Secondly, how this harms women because it gives a bottomless pit of resources to fight them within cases, which is extremely bad. Lastly, how insurance companies have horrible incentives to deal with the women who file these cases and what is extremely bad for them on the ground. Before that, 3 points of clarification. A, how does the legal procedure work? Because I don't think opening got this right. The legal procedure of insurance companies is one known as subrogation. That is to say, the insurance company steps into the shoes of the defendant company and directly takes on the suit themselves as a filed defendant. The defendant company then interpleads. This is very technical, I know, but I just want to get this right for the purposes of the debate, as a party that's non-consequential, and the insurance company directly takes over legally on the whole proceeding. So I want to get this right because the opening quibble on this has made the debate quite messy. I just want to clarify this as a law student. Secondly, I just want to deal with 2 points from opening up. The first point they say is, innocent companies. The first thing, presumably if you're innocent and the employee that you have is innocent, you broadly don't have to pay much cost. I'm unclear as to why this is important. Secondly, to the extent that your employee was guilty, you're culpable within creating the conditions of liability that led to that employee being guilty. I'm quite unsure as to why you can't bear the risk. And this is broadly societally principally true. To the extent that vicarious liability exists as a legal concept to ensure for better resources being given within court cases, because companies who set up their business bear the risk of giving recompense to individuals within their business operations. I think this is just in line with how if I break my arm while at work, my company is also liable, even if it might not have been directly at fault. Secondly, they talk about a seemingly smart argument that you insert smart clauses to force these companies to change. And I think that's their most convincing mechanism. The problem with that is that when you set these clauses by insurance companies, the outcome is very uncertain, which is why I don't think it's likely insurance companies are actually going to do this. That's the exact same reason why if I'm a smoker and I get my premium, the insurance company doesn't really tell me to, you should quit smoking and therefore I'll lower your premium. The likely and more certain outcome that insurance companies always do is to massively increase the premiums so as to cover the risk of sexual assault. So therefore, because the outcome is unclear on their side, they have no incentive and they've never mechanized why this outcome is far more likely than the outcome I'll talk about. Why do we get change on our side? First, extension. The premise is simple. Companies crave certainty to the extent this allows for broadly good things like shareholder confidence, like easy data within quarterly reports, like the ability to allocate your resources and fiscal stability within different things, stuff like that. The issue with a lawsuit, and when a lawsuit is directly pinned against you, is that you are uncertain as to how much money you spend in that. It's not only about the damages that you have within the lawsuit, but also about the fact that you have to do things like seek legal advice for every action that you take. You have to consider whether or not to do interlocutory things between the proceedings. You have to consider where it's worth it to get this witness and stuff like that. Is this uncertainty that makes lawsuits like generally acceptably bad for business within companies, but in particular within this context, extremely bad. Why is that key? 3 reasons. The first is to the extent that lawsuits reduce stuff like shareholder confidence and the ability for the company to plan ahead, there's a lot of incentive to reduce this risk by having companies perform internally. This looks like all the things that OO talks about improving company policies, creating women's caucuses, allowing for better sort of like check and balance within the company system and stuff like that. But secondly, and this is extremely crucial, when the lawsuit is against you rather than the insurance company, this shapes the discourse within the company. People on the ground feel the impending doom of the lawsuit against them, and that's why this integrates into things like board meetings. That's why companies have an incentive to talk about these things and to plan against them. To the extent that insurances are a fixed and externalized cost, it means that it's far less likely that these things are going to be discussed and brought up within the company work. It's far less likely that people are going to introspect because they can simply wave that thing away and return to their bad behavior because they have paid for it anyway. There's no need for them to reconsider how this changes the company. To the extent on our side that this thing is forward-looking and is a future cost they have to do, this is essentially crucial to ensure that companies have incentives to reform. But thirdly, and this is extremely important, to the extent that the cost of lawsuits are uncertain, companies, if they are personally involved, are likely going to err on the side of caution because of all the reasons that OO give about financial stability, about budget allocation, and stuff like that. Why is this important? Because to the extent that the cost is uncertain, you're far less likely going to do obtrusive things that cost you a lot of money in the long run. Things like get the best lawyers who cost astronomical amounts because you're unsure as to how the case will actually go. Things like, for instance, constant interlocutory proceedings to ensure to harass defendants and constantly getting legal advice for settlement amounts that cost a lot of money when you go to law firms because of the uncertain cost. To the extent that this literally affects the day-to-day business operations of companies, their risk-adverse nature likely means that they won't do these things. How does this change on the comparative on that side? Because when you have a bottomless pit of insurance money, as OO themselves characterize, given how rich these companies are, you have all the financial resources to do horrible things. Things like get the best lawyers to fight these cases, things like constantly bring settlement things with extremely bad gagging clauses that stop people from talking about these experiences, that stop people from acknowledging that they were assaulted in the first place. Things like bringing constant harassing injunctions, forcing these people to take a day off work to appear before court, to go through these proceedings, to deal with these things that stop people from bringing their claims. To the extent that you have a bottomless pit of money, this allows you to uniquely do these things that harms people. What is the impact of this? I think broadly this means less claims are being brought to court, more settlements will be pursued, or more claims will be abandoned, which is bad for 5 reasons. A, as I said, settlements quite often have gagging orders that take away the ability for these claims to come out and the story to go on. Before I go on, yes.
All this pre-education happens in status quo because of insurance mandate against smaller companies and PR. What changes is the incentive to harass and prevent complaints in the first place. You don't engage with that.
I'm quite unclear, right? To the extent PR is important on OO's premise, I don't get why internal harassment would be done. To the extent that exposing that literally destroys your company's image, I'm unsure as to why this is not contradictory. The second impact, to the extent that court cases bring back important precedent and regulate conduct, they create for better, meaningful change on the ground. Thirdly, it allows for closure for victims to the extent that their experiences are being aired and they get the finality of guilt. Fourthly, court cases that are successful create more media pressure for change. To the extent that OO talks about PR, the more cases that are lost on their side because of the money means that they get less PR pressure by their own mechanism. Lastly, this ensures better discourse of society. Just look at how Me Too has done, and it increases deterrence because companies don't want to do this. But lastly, why are insurance companies horrible? Per OO, they don't want to dole out these things because of profit incentives. That means they'll do everything within their arsenal. And I know this is true because I've worked in law firms with insurance companies that have done this to harass these people. This looks like things like literally hiring private detectives to follow you around and take pictures of your sexual activities, asking your internet service providers for your internet data and information to see who you have talked to. And these can't be regulated because under insurance law, insurance companies have every right to take all measures they can to defend these claims because they voluntarily take on this as part of the industry conduct. This is extremely bad because it again dissuades victims and harms all these vulnerable people on the ground. Because we have clearly mechanized and given the most extreme harms in this debate, I'm so proud to propose.